Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us for our latest very topical webinar. I don't know whether any of you were watching the news this morning, but certainly supporting people into work is very much on everyone's agenda. I'd like to point out that our webinar is being streamed on YouTube, and there is a link in the chat box if you'd like to go to that. We are recording this webinar, so please keep an eye on your inbox and you should have a recording with an associated email within 24 hours. So you can share it with your colleagues and rewatch if you wish to. If you wish to turn on live captions, which I tend to do, if you go to the box at the bottom of the screen, you will see a captions box. You can turn them on there, so show captions. I find that very useful. And equally well, to avoid distractions, if you go to the chat button, there's an option that says show chat previews. I suggest you untick that so you're not disturbed whilst you're looking at that, but it is a personal choice. I'm hoping that we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. Could I ask you to put any questions that you want me to put forward to my colleagues or myself in the Q&A box, and I'll try and keep an eye on them and look to see which ones are the most popular and try and get to those. So really, on to the information for today. I'm joined today by my colleague Graham and colleagues Tia and Chris from VELA. I will let everyone introduce themselves. I always think that's a little bit easier. So I'm going to the next slide, please, Tom. I'll introduce you a little bit to me. A lot of you may know me. I'm the head consultant of Posturite in my career as a physio, ergonomist, and health and safety consultant. I believe, or I've certainly tried to support people into work because I think work is good for people. Good work is good for people, and I'm not alone in this. I think everybody understands the importance of it. So I'd like to draw on some of my experience and the experience of my colleagues to try and help that today. So next slide, please. So what is the reason? Why is there so much focus? Well, the UK's rise in economic activity has not been replicated in other G7 economies. We're a bit lagging behind. A quarter of all people aged between 16 and 64 have a long-term health condition. And that's a really sad state of affairs, I think. And disabled people are nearly 3 times more likely than non-disabled people to be inactive, economically inactive. And as I've said, good work is good for people. So that's not a good state of affairs. New slide. Next slide, please. A few more statistics here. Disability prevalence is increasing. We've got 38% more people in the working age population classed as disabled compared to a decade ago. And their employment rate is nearly 29% lower than non-disabled people. So we're failing people with particular needs to get them into work. Next slide, please. As you can see from the slide, there's a decline of those working, with now 4.1 million people currently in work with a health condition that is work limiting. And that's a staggering increase in 300,000 in the past year. So we're not getting healthier. We seem to be on a slide to being less healthy. Half of those who are economically inactive due to long-term health are between 50 and 64. That's obviously of a great concern to myself. I'm fortunate, but there's a lot of people who are not as fortunate as me. But we're seeing a great rise in younger people also having problems. So there seems to be an increasingly need for the younger groups to have support. Next slide, please. I think it is no surprise with that data that the government has had a good look and has decided that they need to do something. And at the end of last year, November 2024, a white paper, Great Britain Working, was released. For those of you that are aware of it, fantastic. If not, it is worth looking up. So I'm going to just go through a few key points from that and a follow-on green paper. So can I have the next slide, please? Within the white paper, three key groups were identified. People who are economically inactive due to ill health. Very much, I think, on the focus of ourselves. Young people who are not in education, employment, or training. Yes, I think we need to be very aware of this, perhaps not quite so much on our radar as the first group. And women with caring responsibilities. I think I've got a picture here of somebody, with a child, but I myself have caring responsibilities for people older as well as younger than myself. So I think, we can all identify that these are three sectors that we need to focus on and do better to support into work. Now, within the white paper, there is a lot of focus on benefits. Now, I don't intend to be touching on that subject because that's not where my skill set lies, and I don't think that's where the skill set of most of the people on this webinar lie today. Our expertise is in supporting people both into work and whilst they are at work, and that's what we're going to be focusing on today within our webinar. Next slide, please. So, tackling economic inactivity caused by ill health. There are 600,000 people who are off work with long-term health conditions that state they want to work, they want a job. So this is not a question of people not wanting to work. We have a lot of people who want to work to contribute to society and actually get the benefits for themselves of working. So why are we not managing to achieve this? Well, disabled people and people with long-term health conditions state that these are the challenges in finding work that can accommodate their needs, getting the right support to help and manage their conditions, particularly at work, and having the right adjustments at work. Now, because this has been a focus of my career, I find it quite difficult to understand quite why we're not achieving this, because I think there is so much we can do to accommodate people at work. So I'd like to, we'll sort of see where we can go with that. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, following on from the white paper, in March of this year, there's a consultative paper that was published called Pathways to Work, Reforming Benefits and Support to Get Britain Working. Now, this is, as I said, just a paper for consultation. Now, the consultation shuts on the 30th of June. So for those of you that haven't looked at this and haven't commented and would like to, there is still time. So we will make sure that the link is in the email we send out later. Because I think it's very important for us to have a say if it's something that's important to us. Next slide, please. One of the documents that was attached to the consultation was showing the expenditure on access to work and the expected expenditure for the next few years. And as you can see, that there is a forecast that access to work grant expenditure, which is a very important way to support people into work, is forecast to rise to 712 million by 2930. I think it is therefore no surprise that there seems to be a feeling that this needs to be curtailed somehow. What I think is missing from this slide, though, is there's no mention of the return on this investment. And for employers that employ people who need access to work grants, we know the benefits and the return on investment that we get from supporting people whilst they're at work to do jobs, financial and also emotional, for the individual. So it's a shame. You can see the concern with this slide, why people want to curtail the amount of expenditure, but we need to look at it as to it's not just an expense. There are benefits to supporting people at work. And that's what I think that we need to focus on. Next slide, please. Being a fairly simple soul, um, I think actually how to support somebody at work comes really down to these two things. We need to understand the tasks that we need to do as far as work is concerned. Break it down both physically and mentally. What does the work require? Then we need to spend some time with the individual and find out where their skills lie and maybe where they need more support. It's a bit like a jigsaw. We get the pieces and we look to fit them together. And if we need to make adjustments, then that's where our reasonable adjustments should lie. I do think sometimes, though, we see it as a one-time process. Um, and it can't be, sometimes we have to try things and perhaps they don't quite work. And then we have to learn from that and we have to modify. But I think we can be sometimes fearful about getting it wrong to start with. And this sometimes gets in the way of us making breakthroughs. Let's be honest, sometimes making a mistake can lead to a new discovery, a new way of working, or a new opportunity. So let's not fear of getting it wrong stop us walking along this path to try to support people. Can I have a next slide, please? So what do I think the important points are to this jigsaw? As I said, we need to really make sure we understand the requirements of the job. Quite often, when I'm asked to go and do an assessment of a workstation or something, I ask what the job requirements are, and I get something very vague. And sometimes we need to look a little bit more deeper into actually the physical and the cognitive requirements of what somebody needs to do and how long they need to do it for. We need to speak to the individuals concerned and ask what they are able to do. Let's focus on their abilities, not their restrictions. Ask what support people will need. Quite often, the individual knows what support they need. They may not know how to access it, and they may not need to know, for example, a bit of equipment that can do that, but they do understand the support that they need. So, as a consultant, it's often very easy for me because I can sit and listen, and the answers are already there. So, it's a question of having that discussion. If there are tasks that a person feels they can't do, let's discuss why that is, because that may identify some solutions for that and any support that can help. And maybe actually thinking about doing tasks another way. Just because one person achieves a task in one way doesn't mean to say that it can't be achieved other ways. So discussing change, I think, can be ideal for the individual, but also progressive for other job roles. Right. I think at this point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Graham, who actually can pad out very much what I've said because he does a lot of assessments. So, Graham, over to you. And do you would like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Catherine. Good morning, everybody, and obviously thank you all for joining the webinar this morning. My name is obviously Graham Ashton, so I'm an account manager and ergonomist at Posturite. So I've been working in the field of workplace ergonomics for several years now, supporting organisations across a range of sectors to help improve their health, comfort, and productivity of their staff. So my background combines kind of clinical experience and commercial, which helps give me a good balance between understanding individual needs and helping businesses meet their kind of wider responsibilities, particularly when it comes to DSE compliance and employee well-being. So for those that aren't familiar, DSE stands for display screen equipment, and DSE assessments are a legal requirement with the purpose to ensure that essentially everyone that regularly uses a computer or a screen-based device for work has a suitable and safe setup. And that includes office-based staff, hybrid workers, remote workers, anybody that uses those kind of devices. And at Posturite, we specialize in helping people work more comfortably and safely, and productively as well. So whether that's in the office, home, or somewhere kind of in between, my role basically involves conducting what we call a specialist computer workstation assessment. And they're designed to really identify and address any risks or discomfort that someone might be experiencing whilst using their computer setup. And these assessments go beyond what a basic DSE check would be. And they're typically aimed towards someone that might have a medical condition, suffering from ongoing discomfort, sometimes with complex needs. And what we look to do is look at everything from a postural, a chair, desk, monitor positioning, their keyboard, mouse, the environmental factors around them, such as the lighting and the noise, with the aim that we can recommend tailored adjustments or equipment that can help improve their comfort, reduce strain, and support long-term well-being at work. So let's dive into a recent assessment I conducted because I thought it'd be a good way to sort of show you what it's all about. So let's take a closer look at the workstation assessment itself and why it's so important for those dealing with musculoskeletal issues. I recently visited a healthcare professional, which is what this assessment relates to, and there was someone that was incredibly passionate about their role, and it's really great to go and see someone that wants help, they want advice, they want to be able to work, and they're just looking for what can be put in place to help them get the most out of themselves. They love what they were doing, they were really highly skilled, and they were dedicated to patient care. So there's a lot of similarities in the roles in that way. But several years prior, they'd suffered a traumatic spinal injury, which required a surgical intervention. And while they'd recovered well enough to return to work, long hours at the computer over the years, it was starting to take its toll on them, unfortunately. They'd begun to start experiencing intense fatigue. They were getting regular headaches. They were discussing that they were experiencing pain radiating throughout their back, across their shoulders, going into their upper limb. And over time, additional MSK issues had also started to present because of the way that they were sat and the way they were working. And it had got to a point prior to the assessment where even using the mouse had become significantly difficult for them, and they'd started to develop signs of repetitive strain injury, including a trigger finger within the right pointing finger. And these are kind of classic examples of issues that we see reported within these kind of specialist assessments, and what we kind of encounter. So repetitive strain and trigger fingers can often be linked to prolonged and repetitive movements in people's roles where they're working without that correct ergonomic support. The extreme fatigue angle can sometimes result from poor posture, unsupported seating, or sometimes simply having to overcompensate physically due to a pain that they're experiencing, where they're having to try and sit and manage a discomfort, and that then leads to the fatigue of holding that position. Headaches, sometimes that can be simply associated with monitor height, lighting issues, or sometimes neck tension. And of course, back pain is probably a really crucial one that we see so frequently. Typically could be exacerbated by poor chair support, incorrect seating position, or previous injuries, like in this case. Next slide, please. So before we could implement any solutions, the specialist assessment really was needed to kind of identify a few key issues that were there when I saw the user, and kind of were contributing to their discomfort. So the first thing that I noticed within this particular assessment was the chair they were using was damaged. So one of the key problems was the seat height wasn't holding correctly. So whilst they had a specialist ergonomic chair, over time throughout the day it would gradually lower in height and mean that they weren't able to maintain the correct sitting position. So it was affecting their ability to work comfortably. The armrests were loose, they would wobble. The top of the armrest was cracked as well, so it would limit the amount they'd want to rest their arms, again contributing to the fatigue they were experiencing throughout the day as they wouldn't sit into the chair as they required. And also the lumbar support on the chair wasn't inflating because the inflatable lumbar support and the bulb at the back had perished because the chair was slightly aged. And it simply wasn't giving them the support that they needed throughout the day. When it was first introduced, it was a fantastic adjustment and they said it was brilliant, but over time it just started to show signs of wear and wasn't giving them the support. The second issue that was identifiable was their monitor setup. And the monitor setup was causing them an issue because it was unstable. So because the screens were on their stands, they had to raise them up using books and the textbooks to get them at the desired height. But what that meant is that when they were typing, that their screens would actually wobble. It wouldn't sit in a static position. And that kind of constant micro movement of the screens could be a potential factor in the visual fatigue that they were reporting, and also make it harder to maintain a good neck posture as they were kind of adapting to that screen wobble in that position, which they reported had been going on for a couple of years and just something they simply dealt with and thought, well, I'm better having the screens at the correct height than not. And then finally, I also identified some problems with their upper limb and wrist posture. So the keyboard and mouse were too far apart. The mouse that was being used was off to the side and at an awkward angle. So they'd have their shoulder externally rotated. Their wrist would be kind of in an unnatural position, and they'd be kind of holding that position for long periods with their role that required them to navigate quite a lot through the software that their company used. And that basically led them to the classic signs of RSI that they reported. So these kinds of subtle but also significant issues we often uncover in these kind of specialist assessments, and they're not always immediately obvious, but they can have a serious impact over time, especially for someone that's got pre-existing injuries or musculoskeletal conditions. It exacerbates that and creates a more likely incidence of risk. Next slide, please. So with a specialist assessment, we're able to make some key changes to this person's workstation. So during the initial assessment, as over time they kind of tweaked their setup on the chair. Essentially, they were struggling. They tried everything. They changed the backrest position, the seat height, the angles. They just tried to experiment to see if there was something that could make it better for them. And the downside of that was that they simply hadn't been able to find the correct position and then had forgotten the correct way to sit. So by adjusting the positioning of the chair with the backrest angle, the height of the backrest and the seat to be able to sort of demonstrate to them how they should be sat, educating them in terms of the long-term setup of what they need to achieve, just allowed them to give an instant improvement during the assessment for them to say, actually, this feels more comfortable than it did before you came, which was fantastic for me to sort of see that initial improvement. The armrests that were wobbling was simply that the armrest fittings had gently loosened over time because they've been using the armrest over several years. So simply tightening the bracket had kind of resolved that issue, and then resetting the seat angle allowed them to find a more supportive and comfortable angle to sit on. I also managed to adjust the monitor settings within that assessment as well. So changing things like the brightness, the contrast, and also the text sizing so they were able to comfortably sit into their chair at all times. They weren't having to like lean forwards to try and read things off the screen that were slightly unclear. They weren't having to overstrain their eyes. Giving them that impact immediately was something that hopefully was able to help them manage their symptoms more effectively and reduce the impact of those. And these assessments, then, they're not just about ticking boxes. They're really about finding practical solutions and letting people stay healthy and thrive in work. Because this person really wanted to work and they were very good at their job. And it was really important to kind of give them an initial impact to sort of say, actually, looking at you, we can do this, this, and this to try and improve your setup and try and provide more support. And following the assessment for this healthcare professional, we were able to implement some solutions in place to help address their needs and ease that discomfort that they were reporting. So in terms of sort of the solutions we put in place for them, we introduced monitor arms. So they were fitted to allow precise position of the screens, eliminated that kind of wobble and the unease of the screen position in itself. It meant that they could also bring the screens to the correct eye level and the distance, so their neck was nice in a nice, comfortable, upright position. They were no longer kind of sitting, lifting their chin up or down as they kind of adopted with the chair height that was going slightly lower as the day progressed. And by selecting a monitor arm in this instance for the laptop mounting kit, it allowed them to keep the integral webcam on the laptop at a good height for them when they're on virtual meetings. A common complaint we see is where people leave the laptop on the desk when they're on a Microsoft Teams call, they start lowering to look at the camera and the screen themselves. So by raising that up, it allowed them to stay more upright and work in that manner throughout the day. The chair was still fundamentally suitable, so it was a very adjustable ergonomic chair. It just needed a bit of attention. So we were able to arrange for replacement parts for the chair in terms of the central gas stem for adjusting the height of the chair, replacing the armrest tops, and the inflatable lumbar board to allow the chair to go back to its full working condition, which then enabled us to find the correct sitting position and have the user gain the support that they first experienced when they got the chair several years ago. And all of this just enabled the longevity of the chair to be extended. It was a much more cost-effective solution than replacing the whole chair for a new version, because that chair was ticking all the needs of the user. It just simply become worn over time, and things like the mechanism on the chair showed no sign of defects. There's plenty of wear left in the chair and the seat pads as well. One of the biggest changes introduced in this assessment was actually dictation software. So this was recommended in this instance to try and significantly reduce the amount of typing that the user needs to do. And given the severity of their symptoms in the upper limb and the wrists and the hands, the ability to take that physical workload of typing and mouse navigation away from them and allow them to use their voice to complete tasks just allowed them to manage their symptoms much more effectively. So by putting that software recommendation in place, getting them trained up on the software to be able to navigate comfortably, the software picking up on their voices and setting up a unique profile and setting up shortcuts to help improve their productivity made a huge difference in terms of the amount of stress that was placed on their body in that manner. We did also swap out their standard mouse for a central pointing device. So in this case, a roll bar mouse, which integrated padding positioned directly in front of them. This reduced the need for them to externally rotate their shoulder, keeping their arms in a nice neutral, symmetrical position. And the other benefit of this, given the trigger finger was, it took away that requirement for them to have to kind of grip the mouse and hold it as they were navigating, because with the central pointing device and the roll bar, they could use any finger or thumb to navigate with. And it just allowed them to also split the load between their right and their left hand, which is brilliant because it just allowed a better management of their symptoms. They could work for longer periods before they started to experience those symptoms. We also replaced their keyboard to one that had height adjustable feet. Sorry, next slide, please. So we replaced the keyboard for one which had height adjustable feet as well, so we could change the height of the keyboard by either 5 or 8 millimeters so we had a nice neutral angle from their forearm, wrist, and into their hand when they were typing. And that just meant it was a lot more comfortable in a natural position to try and again alleviate some of those repetitive strain symptoms that they were reporting. And just maintaining that wrist positioning and the report of difficulty for them holding the weight of their arms, we also introduced a solution with an ergo rest. Next slide, please. So you can see the ergo rest on that particular slide, which is the white product, which is clamped to the front of the desk. This product was put in place as a really kind of clever solution to basically provide a bit of support for their forearms and the wrist themselves when they were typing and using that mouse. Because they reported difficulty just holding the weight of their arm up whilst they were working, as much as they had the armrest on the chair to kind of relax back into, as soon as they started typing and using the mouse and navigating, they would end up lifting their arms up to work from. So by putting the ergo rest in place, it allowed a little bit of more comfort and support for them whilst working. The ergo rest was great as a solution for the user. They actually really loved that. It was probably one of the things they commented the most on when I went back to go and help them set it up, was because of the 3 rotational points, they could quite easily move their arms and maintain that support whilst they were working. And they found it kind of revolutionary that there was products and solutions out there which could provide them with that level of support. And each of these interventions might seem small on their own, but together they made a huge difference. I spoke to the user 2 or 3 weeks or so after the solution's been put in place, just to check on how they were doing and make sure the interventions have been successful. And they reported back that their fatigue levels had improved and that it was later in the day before they started to get to the same points. That they felt they were able to stay in their job that they loved for working in without having to put their health at risk. And they even commented that they were able to enjoy evenings after work now, because when they reached the end of the day previously, they felt worn out and didn't really want to do anything. And now they felt like they could, on occasions, go and meet friends and family after work and actually have that improvement in their general overall quality in life. And that for me was probably the most rewarding part of workplace ergonomics, is the ability to positively impact on the lives of the people that I visit and conduct assessments for, which was obviously really rewarding. So that's probably enough from me, and I'll hand over back to Katharine.
Thank you, Graham. I'm so glad you highlighted the impact of good work and allowing a good life, as it were, because I think, everybody realizes, the value, but also, so if you're not absolutely exhausted or in pain at the end of the day, you can enjoy the rest of it, can't you? So thank you so much, Graham, for that. I'm now going to introduce Tia and Chris, who are going to talk about some other simple, I think relatively simple solutions, but I'll let them to introduce themselves and explain some of the positive impacts they've had on people. Over to you guys.
Thank you so much for letting us join you guys today. I've suddenly become very aware of my Danish English accent after Graham and Catherine's perfect presentation, but I will hopefully get my message through, and then I have Chris to assist me if anything is needed, any translation. So just quickly, an introduction of myself. My name is Thea Træholt Johansen, and I am a product manager at VELA. I am based in Aalborg, in Denmark, where the headquarters of VELA is also located. I am a physiotherapist and have experience within specialized rehabilitation of kids and adults. Then I have a master's degree in technoanthropology, which is the learning of the interaction between humans and technology. So also why my passion lies within assistive technology. Then I was hired at VELA as a product analyst in 22, where I was responsible for user involvement. And as a product manager, this is still really my passion and what I am doing a lot of. With me, I have Chris Marshall, the country manager from UK, and have been since 2018. Chris has a bachelor's degree in health studies and then a background within ergonomics and workplace assessments. And Chris is very passionate about all things VELA, which is very true, and maybe even all things in general. But you're gonna meet him a little later on. Yeah, new slide. Next slide. Okay, so I'm gonna begin with giving a bit insight to the perspective of a manufacturer as VELA is. One of the things I really want to highlight today is that VELA is a company that really prioritizes and values the user perspectives. As a manufacturer, it is very easy to get caught up in safety standards and legislation and MDRs and technical limitations, risk assessments, components, and so on and so on. And all these things are, of course, very important, but user involvement is also equally important. Gaining the user's perspective, gaining insight, and really learning and understanding the user needs is equally important to creating these chairs for the users. In the 3 years that I have been working at VELA and conducting a lot of user interviews and user tests, I've never heard a user say, I need a 214 millimeter raise lift or a 3-degree forward tilt angle and so on. So the users speak a different language. They talk about meaningful activities. And what is meaningful activities, and how do we create a chair for meaningful activities? For a lot of our users, a meaningful activity is going to work and being able to perform at their work. And this is where it gets really complex, but also really, really interesting. Because how do we create a chair for meaningful activities or for support or not restricting freedom of movement? How do we create a chair that mitigates risks of trips and falls? And also, how do we create a chair that preserves energy so that it's possible to perform activity outside of work? this is where the users come in, and this is where we really need to listen in order to create the right chairs. This is all user feedback I have included, so this is very representative of our users. I have a video, and this is Danish users returning to work talking about the meaning of the chair in order to perform their work. It's AI generated, so bear with some expressions, but hopefully you will be able to understand.
For me, well, it means a lot. I am really happy with my job down here, and I would very much hate to either reduce my hours or have to do without going to work. It is, yes, I like my job, and it would be really annoying if I had to do without it.
Well, it allows me to still have a social life beyond just being at home with my children, right? And my husband. And that I get out and meet other people and still get to work in my field, which is in demand here on Langeland.
It was simply very much, I mean, this is just as much passion for me as it is my job. I mean, I love what I do.
I have a daily life that works. I am out socially. I can come home and share what's happening at my work. I'm not just sitting at home waiting for someone to come and tell me what's happening out in the world.
This is meaningful activity, going to work, and this definitely paints the picture of why they need to be able to work. I just spoke about the very complex things about creating chairs based from the user perceptions. So how do we translate these user perceptions into something that we, as a manufacturer, can work with? And one perspective is the physiological perspective. Because in order to work seated, we have some factors or some perspectives we need to tick off. We need to create stability, we need to create freedom of movement, and we need to create postural control. In terms of stability, we have the work chair has a very solid base foundation and a very solid brake system. And this is a very good foundation for creating stability. We get sometimes feedback on our base being large and heavy, but I always ask what kind of, if you see the three figures, what figure do you think is the most stable? And as you probably already guessed, the purple triangle is of course the most stable figure. And just as the work chair, it has a very large and solid base foundation, and this is making it very hard to challenge the stability of the chair. The freedom of movement is important because our users need to move around. They of course need to move around while seated in the chair, and the seat and back is designed for this, but also they need to mobilize, maybe seated, maybe walk the chair around. And therefore, the easy running wheelbase is a very important factor in order to maintaining this freedom of movement. When it comes to postural control, in order to be active while seated, we need to have this postural control. And postural control is the ability to maintain a balance and a posture during activity. And our seat and our back, our armrests, all are components that support this postural control. However, we also know that we have users who need additional support. And this is where our quite large assortment of accessories comes in, because we are able to adapt the chair to the specific and individual need for this postural control. For example, with lateral body supports or thigh supports, So yeah, next. Yeah, okay. And this thing about making the chair very adaptable is the next point I really want to get through, because creating the right match between chair and users is really important in order to achieve the full potential of independence of the user. And when we talk about creating this right match, we have three different factors. We have, of course, it's actually quite similar to what Katharine spoke about in terms of the person, the task, and then the fit. We have three different factors. We have the individual resources and abilities, we have the activity, and then we have the surroundings. And these three factors needs to align in order to create the right match. When it comes to individual factors or resources and abilities, we need to look at the body functions and autonomy. What size, what dimensions, it's relevant in terms of deciding seat and back depth and width, installing the armrests. We also need to take a look at the strength of the users. Do we need to is a manual work chair sufficient, or do we need to look into the electrical raise function? What about balance, pain, and also level of relief? And level of relief is relevant because depending on the purpose of the chair, it is important to take a look at level of relief. Sometimes the chair is a tool to perform activity, and sometimes it have a purpose of rehabilitation, and therefore the level of relief is a bit lower than if the purpose of the chair is to relieve pain. So level of relief is also very relevant when finding the right match. We also have the activity, the purpose of the activity and the task at hand, just like Katharine spoke of. And of course also the duration. The duration of the activity is important to have in mind, because the seat is a very important factor when you have to be seated for longer hours. We have the surroundings also. We need to take a look at the barriers. What kind of barriers do we meet in order to perform activity in our workplaces? Also, the chair size may be an issue. We have to look at the workstation design and the work height. All these factors in order to choose the right chair for the right surroundings. Finally, we also have to look at what kind of interaction is there between the user in the chair and maybe other machinery, a table, a workstation, and maybe other people. So a lot of different factors that have to come together in order to create the right match for the individual user. Yeah. And in order, regarding creating the right match, we have been so fortunately to have a couple of professors and occupational therapists and a PhD student to do a study on our work chair. In the study, the chair is called activity chair, but this is what we call the work chair in Denmark. So work chair and activity chair is the same thing. The study is called User Perceptions of Aspects Related to the Use of Activity Chair. And this is a very interesting study. I have only highlighted 3 points of the study, but I can definitely recommend, if you are interested in learning more about the use of the activity chair or the work chair, to have a look at this study. One of the interesting things is that this study found out that I think it is based on 141 participants, so quite a significant amount of participants. And interestingly, the study found that among these participants, there was only a 2.8 non-use rate. And a non-use rate is a term that is used when measuring the use of assistive technology. And a 2.8 rate is very low. When I compare, we can, for example, compare to a walker. A walker is have a non-use rate around 15, 16, 17%. So 2.8 is very low. The study also showed that 75% of the participants actually used the chair for additional activities than what it originally was meant for. And this may also have something to do, or at least be coherent with the 2.8 non-use rate. But very interesting that our users find out that, okay, I'm using the chair for one thing, but actually the more independent I get, I figure out that I'm able to use the chair for a lot of different things, additional things. So the user becomes independent in a lot of other different situations. Yeah, and lastly, we had the study showed that out of the 141 participants, 84% of the response of the participants indicated that they were either high or very satisfied with the chair. And of course, 84 is a very nice score, but as a manufacturer, we of course are very interested in the last 16%. Unfortunately for us, there were also identified some barriers in the study. And the two barriers identified were a lack of instruction and a lack of training. So when the participants were given the chair, if they hadn't experienced enough instruction or training, they would probably not have scored the chair as high in use. And also, these environmental factors, which we of course also are very interested in, but also very aware that environmental factors are very difficult to. Sorry, can you go one slide back? Yeah, perfect. Overcome. So lack of instructions is crucial in terms of barriers and also environmental factors. Okay, you can skip. Perfect. Okay, so a very interesting study. And the very nice thing about this study is that actually this research group has continued researching in the chair, in the work chair. So they have done a part 2, and I have to mention that this is still in the making and not yet published. So therefore, this is not official research results, but there are tendencies which I am able to present to you here. Because part 2 is a measurement of the motor skills and a user self-assessment on the perception of effort, efficiency, safety, and satisfaction. And this is where it becomes really interesting in terms of instruction and training in the use of our work chair. Next slide, please. Yeah, because I have brought 2 examples of users that is participating in the part 2 of the study. This is Hanne. Hanne was given the work chair with no assessment and no instruction. And the trial period ran for 13 weeks, and every week she would get a visit from an occupational therapist that evaluated her motor skills. And Hanne would self-assess her perceived effort during these activities she was performing every week. She was performing an activity with and without the chair. And what we unfortunately see here with Hanne is that there is no coherence in the performance of her activities. There is no real pattern or picture in when she's doing activity with or without the chair. So the conclusion was that Hanne was actually giving the wrong chair because it had not been assessed correctly. So it turned out that the chair she was given was not even possible to do or perform the activity she needed support for. Her individual mobility issues weren't taken into consideration either. So this was definitely not the right match. And unfortunately, after 13 weeks, Hanne lost the motivation to perform these activities because her perceived effort were very high. This was Hanne. Moving on to the next slide, I have Tove. Tove received the chair with thorough assessment and instruction. And what we see is a completely different pattern than with Hanne. Tove have a total alignment or close to alignment with doing the activity with and without the chair. But she experienced an increase in motor skills with the chair, and she improved a significant decrease when performing the activity with the perceived effort when performing the activity with the chair. Tove was giving the right chair, and she had the right assessment and right instructions. So she really had success with using the chair, and also I can't see the last diagram. Oh, there it is. But interestingly, Tove also felt she performed the activity a lot safer than without the chair. Moving on. Okay, this was a very, I hope you got some background into what we're doing research-wise, and hopefully we will have research ready for you in the part 2, but we have to wait until it is finished and hopefully published. And this is actually where I bring in my colleague Chris, because we have some short videos, just a couple of examples also of some of our users. So please say hello to Chris, and he will take over for a short time.
Well, good morning all, and I'm very conscious of time. I see there's some nice questions coming through. So this is the assisted standing VELA chair. You can see quite clearly here the solid base, the braking system, and then our sit to stand assisting here and saving energy. Next slide. This is a wonderful video of Alison. She's living with MS, fibromyalgia, and also ataxic. I was put to task having tried several chairs and not finding the right match. So addressing her ability and the environment, the VELA Tango here was suitable and matched and ticked every box. Here, assisting with the safe entry and exit. And it's the stability of the 4-star base, and then our rotation, so she can address the workstation, and the feedback directly from Alison as per Graham and as per Catherine is that Alison had more energy to spend it with friends and family out of work. Next slide.
And I'll just shortly introduce Cecilia. Cecilia is a young woman, 38 years old. She has a cerebral palsy. She's working at an office 5 hours a day, 5 days a week. And the thing about Cecilia is that she has these spasms, these involuntary movements. And if she is not using the work chair, she has to use a normal office chair. And this normal office chair, the lack of stability triggers her spasms and involuntary movements, which makes it very difficult for Cecilia to have a safe entry and exit of the office chair. So she has cerebral palsy and has had a work chair her whole life. So this is her normal, but she can't really safely enter or exit a chair without this stable brake system. Yeah. that was actually the couple of examples we have with you. I have talked a lot about these 3 factors in choosing the right chair for the right user. And I just want to highlight that this purpose of increasing the functional level, of course, with the aim of creating a greater independence, and final outcome is to increase quality of life, which fortunately we know that a lot of our users experience. So thank you for having us, and sorry that it took a little more time.
It's great. I mean, it's so exciting to see what we can do. Can I ask you all guys to come on screen, because we've got some very interesting questions that I'm going to knock off a few possibly to start with, as I've been looking at them, so I'm lucky at this. There's a question about problems being with the sort of commute to work, which I think we all know. And I think in a way with hybrid working and with the technology, there's a lot we can do to help support people in, not to have a commute. I've also myself found that varying the times of the commute so that you can get a seat and you don't have to queue can be very helpful. So I think it's a very interesting comment, but I think some creative solutions can be found for the commute. There's also a request as to the design of buildings. And in fact, the Equality Act clearly states that the buildings, must be fit for people with disabilities. And I know that it's aimed at improving new builds, but we do also have under the Equality Act was 2010, so there's been a lot of new builds and modifications since then. So yes, there is a legal requirement to improve access, but also we have reasonable adjustments for people too. So there is a legal basis to try and improve access to people. Was a quick one about where do people access to work grant, and just a very quick note on that for the individual to say it must be the person who has the requirements who applies for an access to work grant, and this is usually done through Job Centre Plus. We'll send out some information, but if there's anything else that you want to ask and we can help with that, just a little caveat, there is a long waiting list often, so the sooner you get the application in, the better. But any support we can give on that, please let us know. There's a excellent one that Chris mentioned in his thing about chairs, ergonomic chairs normally having a 5-star base. And had this been considered, Chris? And I know you and I have discussed this in the past. Would you like to box that one off for me?
It's an ongoing discussion, isn't it? But with the VELA chair, we're a medical listed, so medical device. So we sit outside of that legislation. And in actual fact, the 4-wheel base with the low center of gravity is actually supersedes the stability. So it's actually safer to sit on and is much more stable.
And I actually think we've all experienced with a 5-star base, often that wheel can cause a problem with footrests and other things as well. So within the DSE regs, it clearly states that if somebody has particular needs, there are exceptions to the DSE minimum requirements as long as it is safe. So I think yes, there is a time and a place for a different design, as Thea quite rightly pointed out at the beginning of her session. It's all about a safe, good support for the individual, isn't it?
Yeah, and the H frame, which allows you to walk the chair, but also means that you can enter and exit it safely, perhaps with a walking frame, a rollator or wheelchair power chair. It allows for easy access.
Excellent, thank you. Graham, I might come to you with this one about the pathology lab. I don't know if you can see the question as to whether we offer options that are non-fabric.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So a lot of the ergonomic chairs on the market have actually got the options to change the fabrics on them to make them suitable for kind of lab environments or even industrial environments. So a lot of chairs will have the ability for certain upgrades to be able to make them kind of ESD compliant if it's in a factory kind of element. In a lab setting, there's ones that have got white clean materials to be able to enable them to be in those environments and safe. So we can do that on specialist models of ergonomic chairs as well as specifically designed lab seating as well. So there's kind of a two-toned approach where there's standardized furniture that is quite highly adjustable for those lab settings, but also specialist ergonomic chairs to provide specific support to users that can be produced in a white clean fabric material suitable for that area.
Yes, we also do sort of different levels of stitching and things, don't we? So I think
Yes.
there's some quite interesting ones. Oh, Chris, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, just very quickly. I missed out on the laboratory inquiry, but today we're very much focused on VELA's rehabilitation side of our portfolio. Just to inform you that we have our medical lab chairs, so suitable, all wiped down, all alcohol, chlorine proofed, and I'm happy to provide you with some information on those guys afterwards that you can perhaps send out.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Actually, whilst I've got you, Chris, that we had a question in advance asking what seat types were best for alleviating pressure on the legs. And actually, whilst I've got you, for those with shorter statures.
Okay, I can answer those very briefly, very quickly. Shorter stature, we do an awful lot for organisations like LP UK, Little People UK, supporting people back into school and the workplace. With the VELA chair, think of it like Lego from Denmark. It's adaptability. So once you've done your anthropometrics body measurements, you can come back to myself and we can either custom or we can take something straight off the shelf and adapt it to that individual. We manufacture just in time per individual. So provide us with the anthropometrics, we will come back with a solution. With regards to pressure on the legs, we do have our contour seating range, which Thea was very heavily involved with, working very closely with foam manufacturers, looking at pressure mapping. So that may have been a first port of call to try something like that. Otherwise, if the individual is a power chair, wheelchair user and accustomed to a solution, then what we can do is we can strip the seat back to what we call an O-board, and then we can place a J cushion, whatever it may be that they're accustomed to, onto a VELA frame.
Yeah.
So we can replicate what they may have in a wheelchair power chair.
Yeah, I think I hope that people take away from this is that the solutions, we can usually find a solution. There are different ways, can't always see it in a book, but we can usually create and support things for people. And I think that's a really important message sort of to take away. And in fact, we have another question in the chat about somebody who's describing a sort of non-standard seating position. I'm glad the individual has found a solution for that. But yes, as we are supporting a wider variety of people into work, we are having to be creative. So I would just encourage anybody who has non-standard seating needs to contact us. And I'm sure we can work to try and find a solution in many cases. So I say don't give up if you don't see it in a standard brochure, I think is the answer there. I had a question that was put forward in advance about legislation supporting wheelchair users and that sort of thing. And I think just want to remind people that obviously the Equality Act does provide the support that you may need for people with particular needs. And let's not also forget the regulatory reform order in relation to fire safety that requires employers to make sure that everybody can exit a building. So there's good regulation and legislation there to support people who are working with particular needs. Oh, I think
there's just one question coming here,
got
Catherine.
one there?
You may be able to answer, but I'm pretty sure. Do access to work fund chairs for self-employed people working from home?
It's not always a simple answer because, as we know, access to work, there's lots of things. But I certainly know some self-employed people who have had support when they work at home. I can't definitively say absolutely every time because there are different criteria, but yes, there are people who are self-employed who have been supported by access to work grants.
Thank you.
Now, has anybody seen anything else that I've missed?
Just looking.
Right. I think probably we will wind it up there then. Just want to say that there's going to be a follow-up email within the next 24 hours, hopefully some good information and a recording of this. If you've got any inquiries or thoughts after this webinar, please reach out to us. There's a contact us button on our website, or contact the account manager. Let us know. We're always happy to chat, or certainly I am, and a lot of our colleagues are always happy to chat. We have a passion for trying to support people, so please reach out to us. Our next Posturite webinar is in late July, so please sign up to our mailing list and we'll let you know what we're up to. And I think without further ado, thank you everybody. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Tia. Thank you, Graham. I'm really excited about, I suppose I've been at this long enough, but more we can support people, the better. And it's good to see that everybody else is now thinking that we need to do the same. So I'm looking forward to a bright future. So if there's nothing for anyone else, I think we'll say goodbye and thank everyone for listening.
Thank you.
Goodbye now.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.